it.
We're here.
Made it.
We're here.
Hello. Welcome to CLCI Live.
We're missing some people.
I'm your host, Brooke Walters.
And I'm co-host, Anthony.
Anthony, what's our subject today?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We're just playing around, goofing, because we always miss our lovely team. They're off playing and having a roller coaster of a time. So we miss them. We appreciate them. But we can handle this, can't we?
We can. This week, the inmates are running the asylum.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have found helpful with students through this process of going through training, through the process of being mentored, there's the exam after all of that. After you've got your coaching hours in, you have to have 100 coaching hours in, you have to have 10 mentor hours in, and at least our level, there we go again, coaching 101 and 102. So once you've got that all accomplished, there's that blasted exam. I hate exams, and yet you still got to take one. The idea of how to prepare for it, we're going to dive into that a little more. We touched base with it last week. We shared with you last week some students that got through it and are now credentialed. So now we're going to break down those questions and talk into them a little bit more. Dan's here to help explain it the best. He's been on repeat mode with these questions because he can't get it right. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
That's the thing. When you teach, you get to really learn this stuff. So he has utilized these questions that ICF has produced to help students study and prepare for the exam. So we're going to talk into that. Jerome, tapping into you before we tap into Dan. Anything you want to add?
Just making sure everything is going on well in the background.
Okay.
I just didn't hear much of what you guys said, kind of zoned out, making sure we've got everything good. But I know what we're speaking about today, which is the coaching questions on the exam, or the exam questions on your guys' test for the ICF. So excited to tap into that. We'll actually be diving into some questions. I'm not sure if either of you guys mentioned this, but we'll be diving into questions, some sample questions that'll be similar to what you can expect on the exam. So it's going to be really cool. You guys get to go in depth with us as we kind of explore some of the potential questions, sort of the types of questions that you'll be getting on the exam.
Are we inviting comments?
Oh, please,
Please ask questions. Ask as many questions as you possibly
can. Share. Play with us.
Answer on the fly.
We want your engagement.
Ask for what you want. We want you to interact with us so we know what your questions are or thoughts are in this process. That's how we gauge what we're sharing. Okay, Dan, what did you want to say about these questions?
So let's start with some baseline information of just considering the test and how to approach the questions in the test. The first one is, I think it's important to make it clear that this test is not just for ACC level coaches. As you're coming in, yes, you'll be taking it as your first exam and hopefully in your life, the only exam you're ever going to take. But for those who are already credentialed who are on the old test that existed prior to August of last year, when we up-level our credentials, we now have to take it as well. So later this year, when Lisa and I both get our MCC recordings passed, yes, we will have to take this test. So that brings an extra level of nuance to the understanding that it's for everybody. So with that, what the ICF calls the what versus the who. The what would be a problem-focused question or problem focus within the session from the coach. Who-based questions are going to be more directed toward the person. So whenever we're going, and they're where the bigger impact, the deeper dive, the greater awareness, getting away from the situation, getting into the client, the human being in front of you. So as we consider a continuum of answers, What will tend to be the better answers will be the ones that address the emotion in the room, that address the client's use of metaphor. That's a hint for one of the questions. That ask, when there's emotion in the room, asking if the client is comfortable talking about it rather than just assuming they need a break. That's a big hint. So on the one end of the continuum, you have being aware of the emotion in the room without assumption, just asking the client if they would like to talk about it, because client leads the way. As we move down that continuum, assumption takes it toward the worst answer. So if you see things like there's emotion in the room, ask the client if they need a break since they seem upset. That would be coming from the coach's perspective or the coach's assumption. If the client's upset, they need a break. So assumption takes it further down the scale away from the best answer.
So let's hold that phone for a minute, because I think what we skipped over is on the exam questions, you're given a scenario. There's a term for this, but I can't remember it off the cuff now. So you're given a coaching scenario, and then you're given like 4 opportunities of an answer. The first go-to answer is what's I believe, the best answer out of these 4. What's going to be the best result for coaching, right? And then after you answer that, then the next answer is what is the worst option here for that coaching experience? So essentially, it's not coaching. So what is coaching and what is not coaching on the best and worst answers? Okay. Mm-hmm.
So on that continuum, we start with being present with the client as a person, asking permission tends to be the best answer, or toward the best answer. At least acknowledging the emotion, it keeps it on the upper side of the scale, but then there tends to be assumption in there. If there's assumption, that takes it away. The next would be a problem-focused answer, particularly if there's emotion in the room, asking the client, what do you want to do next? And then the worst, what tends to be the worst answer, is a problem-focused answer with assumption built on top of it. So notice how assumption drags it further down the scale. So in the 4 points that we've kind of come up with, person, with coaching the person or being focused into the emotion, what's present in the room, and asking permission to continue tends to be the best. Addressing the emotion, or at least being aware of it's okay. Addressing the problem, okay, but then the worst answer tends to be very transactional or also has layers of assumption on top of it. And I'll call those out as we get into each of the questions. Other things to look for here in the worst answers, look for words like suggest, because coaches don't suggest. In the best answers, look for the words pause and acknowledge together, not independently, because there might be places where you would pause, but others where pause and acknowledge is more powerful. Is there anything else we want to call out before we go into the questions?
I don't think so.
I
That
don't-
covered a lot.
Yeah,
Ooh,
I think we just get into it. Yeah.
let's
I mean, I could say Anthony, but I already lost it. I'm not Anthony.
The other thing for those watching and who might want to look at the test questions on the ICF website later on their own, there's 8 questions there. We realized this one right around the holidays. There's 8 questions that are available, sample questions available. Well, I just said available like 30 times. And there's how many core competencies? 8. 1 question per core competency in the samples, and they're associated numerically. Question number 1 is comp 1. Question 2, comp 2. Question 3, comp 3. Just go on down there, and you'll see when you know that, you'll start to see the bullet points where they're relevant to within the competency.
But
Let's
don't
do it,
count
Drew.
on that to be on the test.
Exactly.
They're
Exactly.
randomly placed on the exam.
How dare they?
How dare they?
All
Okay.
right, are we ready to dive in?
Let's
Yes,
do
sir.
it.
Okay, we've got a quick synopsis as to what to expect on the questions. Let's see. So kind of what Dan was explaining. You will be getting a scenario prior to answering each of these questions, and this excerpt here kind of explains exactly what to expect.
Okay,
So
let's
coaches. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, a coach is meeting with a prospective client. Keyword here is prospective. Remember, this is around core competency number 1 about holding an ethical practice. Coach is meeting with a prospective client. The person is not a client yet. They're considering it, who is growing a new business. The coach and potential client quickly establish an easy connection. The coach is excited about the opportunity, to work with the client. As the coach and the client are ending their conversation, the prospective client briefly mentions the name of their new business. The coach recognizes the business as the coach is an investor in a more established competitor business in the same community. What should the coach do? Let's give it a click. So the 4 choices, choosing the best action, would it be A, not say anything, try to keep their role as an investor in a competing business separate from their role as a coach? B, share that the business name sounds familiar and make a mental note to determine whether it's a competitor business later that evening? C, share their role as an investor in the competitor business only if the potential client follows up to pursue coaching with the coach? Or D, share their role as an investor in the competing business and acknowledge the possibility of a conflict of interest with the client? What is the best action?
So I think this one's obvious for the best, but I don't think it's obvious for the worst. I think
Exactly.
D is obviously best.
D is obviously the best. Yes, full transparency, share it up front. So if D is full transparency, what does that lead us to as possibly being the worst answer?
A.
A, full opacity, not saying anything and having the client come on board and then try to keep the roles different. At least the other 2 address it at some point that there's an elephant in the room, as this is a potential competitor, but it doesn't address it as openly and upfront. Let's say, like with answer number C, share it only if the potential client follows through or follows up. Well, the client might have been really looking forward to working with that coach. And now that they're ready to say, here's my money, the coach says, well, I'm not sure that I can take that, because now the client's disappointed because they were not able to make a decision based on the full honesty of the coach.
And if you watched this last week, you might have had a bit of a heads up on this one, because I think we went over this one. So,
Yeah.
but don't worry, we have plenty more to go over if you were here last week. Some brand new, fresh ones for you guys.
It doesn't hurt to repeat, honestly, because
Never.
of this mindset that they do this worst best scenario. And the decision was, when we spoke last week, that it's more easily determined the best answer. What the gray area is choosing the worst answer.
A client struggles with delegating tasks at work to other team members. During the last session, the client shared that an important project they're leading is falling behind schedule. The coach supported the client in identifying strategies to delegate tasks to other team members. At the next session, the client reports back and shares, in the end, I decided to complete all the tasks myself. That was the only way to get them done on time. The coach feels disappointment that the client did not follow through on their plans to delegate. This one, question number 2, is around core competency number 2 of maintaining a coaching presence, coaching mindset. So what's the best action? A, immediately reflect back on their last session with the client and identify what they could have done differently to support the client in following through on their plans. B, take a breath and acknowledge that the client is responsible for their own choices of whether to follow through with their stated plans or not. C, set aside their disappointment for now and focus on the current session with the client. Decide to reflect on this situation during an upcoming session with their mentor coach. D, praise the client for meeting project deadlines, but ask them why they failed to support their team members' development. What's the
Well,
best
it's not
one?
that. It's either B or C, I think.
So you are correct on one of them.
Okay.
Correct.
50-50. Which one are you going to go for?
That's you, Jen.
I mean, B is about being in the moment, and C is about thinking into the future. So I guess I would stay with B.
Ooh.
B is correct. The big one here is, if you look at core competency number 2, one of the bullet points is recognizing that the client is autonomous and responsible for their own decisions. In C, the the coach is still hanging on to it until I meet with my mentor coach later in the week. Like,
Right.
it's not
Okay.
mine, not me, not mine, not I. Let
Okay.
it go.
And that's
then,
kind of an indication, it became a coach-centered answer versus a client-centered answer.
Hmm.
All right, Jerome, let's go. What is the worst action then?
All right. Does anyone want to take a stab at it, or?
Oh, there's one more click in the animation. You're good. It'll switch the words in the
There you
corner
go.
first, and then, like I said, I've done this about 50 times.
I mean,
So
I
think
would
about
say,
transaction, think about process, think about a doing as the worst answer.
I feel like D is a bad answer.
yeah,
It's not only a bad answer, it's the worst one.
yeah. There's
Congratulations on doing what you said you weren't going to do, or not doing what you said you were going to do.
right. Congrats, you failed.
Yeah. So notice how there's that word acknowledge in B. Take a breath and acknowledge. Another way to say pause and acknowledge. Client's responsible for their own decisions. They're autonomous. Oh, down here in the worst answer, praise the client for me. We also don't praise. That came up last week as well. So why didn't you do what you say you were going to do? All right.
All right, let's move on.
Now we go to core comp number 3. So this one's going to be around contract setting, beginning of the session. A client comes to a session appearing very stressed. When the coach asks what the client wants to talk about, the client frantically lists a major event they're planning at work, a large family gathering they're organizing, and caring for their aging parents. The client seems overwhelmed, and the coach notices tears in the client's eyes. So now we've got a frantic energy, and there's tears in the client's eyes. So there's some emotion in the room. But we also have 3 topics. And what is the best action? So before I read through them, client comes to the session, and immediately when the coach asks, what do you want to talk about, gives the coach 3 items and then has tears in their eyes. Ask the client if they need to take a moment before starting the session since they seem upset. Ask the client to share more about their aging parents. Acknowledge that the client has shared 3 significant challenges they're facing and ask what the client would like to explore first. Ask the client to begin with the major event they're planning at work since they mentioned it first.
So this one's pretty
Yeah,
obvious.
pretty simple.
Mhm.
C is clearly the best.
Correct.
But this is where
And-
we're shaky.
Yeah, where's it coming? So thinking about that continuum I gave us before we started, emotion in the room, lean toward that as the best. Then addressing emotion, but nothing else, or a assumption on top of it, takes it away from the best answer. Process takes it away, takes it closer to the worst. Process plus assumption takes it to the worst.
It kind of feels like A or D.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense is because we've got an assumption added to the bonus of the coach choosing, it's going to be D.
Yep.
Correct.
That's what I would say. Because A, there's still a chance that the session could go in the direction that the client wants to go after the pause. Whereas this one, they're picking the direction for the client.
Okay, so let's break these 4 down because you nailed it. So why not A? A is not the best answer because while it does address the emotion, there's the assumption from the coach that the client needs a minute. So that takes it away from at least acknowledging it, but it keeps it away from the worst because it's still person-centric in the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
B is not the worst answer because while it is the coach choosing from one of the 3, D becomes the worst because the coach chose from one of the 3 based on the assumption, oh, that must be the most important. They said it first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just answered what Misha popped in there. They're both the coach choosing the direction, but on D, the coach is choosing it with the added assumption that it's the most important because it was mentioned first.
That's very helpful.
Piling
With the added
on.
assumption.
Piling on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is one of the wordy ones.
Oh.
A university biomedical researcher is working with a coach to improve their interactions with colleagues. The client is a very analytical thinker and can easily explain detailed data points and complex graphs, but seems reluctant to share anything personal with the coach. In previous sessions, the coach encouraged the client to describe how they felt at social events, but the client seems highly uncomfortable answering only with short one-word responses. When the client arrives at their session today, the client silently hands the coach a journal. The coach has written several detailed entries over the last week about their experience attending a university luncheon, a faculty party, and a staff development workshop since their last session. While the client says little to the coach in the moment, their entries show deep reflection about the anxiety the client experienced at these events and their desire to overcome social anxiety. What should the coach do? I always read that and I think of Dennis Hopper in Speed. Like, what are you going to do, hotshot? What? A, acknowledge the reflection work the client has done and ask the client if they feel comfortable exploring some of the emotions they described in the journal. B, ask the client if they would summarize the entries they detailed in the journal for the coach. C, ask the client to identify some steps they can take to overcome the anxieties they wrote about. D, ask the client what new awareness they developed about themselves through the journaling process. This is Core Comp 4.
So I think the best is D.
Wah, wah. Try again.
And I was
Today.
thinking A.
Yes, A. Acknowledge the work and then notice, ask them if they feel comfortable because in the past they have not been. And they're not saying much right now. So the person, coaching the person, addressing the emotion in the room, asking if they're comfortable going there. Then what would be the worst answer? And here again, leaning toward transaction-based question and process.
So probably C.
More than probably it is.
Okay. Because C is asking them to go to the end stage of the session without even having exploration.
Mm-hmm. And it's also here's someone who is potentially uncomfortable talking about emotion, but they've done this reflective work. They've at least started to break through this boundary, this space they have for themselves. They handed the coach the journal, and so what do you want to do to get over that?
Right.
Not
Right.
addressing any development at all. Where at
Right.
least B and C address some development, but they're also both directive. Where A, it acknowledges that the client has not felt comfortable addressing it before. All right. A coach recently began working with a client to help them plan for retirement. The client is a well-respected teacher who has taught for 30 years at a local elementary school. The client consistently arrives highly prepared and organized for coaching sessions, routinely reporting progress between sessions and identifying specific topics to work on during the coaching conversations. The client shares they are looking forward to retirement, but they discuss their retirement plans in a very matter-of-fact way. During the current session, the client shares they have 2 weeks left before their retirement begins. They would like to focus on the few remaining plans they need to make. Suddenly, the client begins to cry and says, "I've spent half my life at this school. I adore my students and my colleagues are my best friends. I can't imagine what my life is going to be like when I no longer walk through the front doors of the school each morning." What should the coach do? Pause for a moment, then ask the client to identify the remaining plans they would like to focus on today. Ask the client if they're sure they want to retire. Acknowledge that retirement is a significant life transition and that emotional responses are normal. Pause, then acknowledge the emotional impacts the transition seems to be having on the client and ask if they would like to spend some time with those feelings.
So based on our last answer,
C.
this has got to be D.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
Pause and acknowledge seems to be the key, and then ask. Pause, acknowledge, ask.
Mm-hmm. So then what would be the worst one?
B.
That's always the hard one. I kind of
Yeah.
feel like
Well, use the criteria. Is it at least addressing the emotion or is it going straight to process?
that's where I'm going with B, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
That's addressing the emotion.
Okay.
Oh.
B
So
is
A.
addressing the emotion? Ask the client
Yeah.
if they want.
Are you sure?
Oh
Now
my
there's this
God.
hesitation. I don't know what I'm going to do. Are you sure you want to retire? Is at least addressing some level of the
Okay.
emotion in the room.
And A is just skipping right through the emotion.
Going
today.
straight for the,
Yeah.
oh, what do you want? Okay, so you're crying.
Mhm.
Let's work on your plans for retirement. Yep. So notice again how this pattern, the emotion in the room, addressing it, acknowledging it, asking if the client would be comfortable exploring it, tends to lean toward the best, and just completely ignoring it or adding assumption to it takes it to the
Yeah, the
worst
added
answer.
assumption. I forgot about that part. Yep.
Okay. On to numbers. I think this is number 6. A client is working with a coach to support them during an important career transition. The client currently holds a demanding role as a chief operating officer of a company while also raising 2 young children and serving as primary caretaker for their aging parents who live with the client. The client recently received job offers from 3 different companies, each requiring the client and their family to relocate. The client comes to the session excited about the new job opportunities and hopes to gain clarity through the session on which offer to choose. The client starts by discussing the things they are looking for in a new job, energetically listing opportunities for growth, challenging responsibilities, a talented team to lead, and the potential for travel. When the coach asks what the client's children and aging parents may need in a new community, the client's excited smile disappears and they are suddenly quiet. Before you click here, Jerome, there's something I want to add here because it was asked a couple of classes ago. The idea of the coach asking what the client's children and aging parents may need. It was
Mhm.
asked a little while ago of, isn't that the coach directing? No, because it's already inherent in the scenario and the coach is being a thought partner, creating a more holistic answer,
Mm.
getting all the data points in that have already been there. So it's adding into the bigger conversation so that the most informed choice can be made.
Okay.
All right, now we go. What's the best action? Repeat the question to the client and give them another opportunity to respond to the coach's inquiry. Ask the client if they are okay to proceed with the session or if they need a break. Pause for a moment, then share with the client they notice the change in the client's energy. Ask if the client would like to explore what they are feeling in this moment. D, support the client by weighing the offers they've received by inviting the client to explore each of the characteristics they listed for in a new job.
I think this is another easy one. The right
Yeah.
answer is B.
What is it?
C.
See?
C.
Yeah,
C.
definitely, without a question.
This
Yep.
one on the fence about.
The worst one.
Think about how possibly cold and transactional you could be here.
So A?
D.
Uh-huh. Oh, you didn't hear me the first time? Let me just repeat the question.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Where at
Completely
least,
ignoring the emotion,
That's yeah.
energetic shift. Yeah.
yep. So A or B at least acknowledges some emotion, and C moves to process, but repeating the question is probably the coldest thing you could do here.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Ooh, metaphor alert, metaphor alert. This is core competency number 7. A coach is working with a client who is an experienced marathon runner writing a book on training for endurance races. This is a long held dream for the client. The coach notices that the client often uses running metaphors when talking about their challenges and progress in their writing. The client is typically upbeat and energetic, but they arrive at today's session appearing tired and discouraged. They share with the coach that they have recently hit a wall in writing, with 3 chapters remaining. When they sit down to write, the client says they can barely come up with anything and nothing that's worth publishing. The client says they are afraid they won't be able to complete the book on time and that all of their work toward this goal will be lost. What should the coach do? Best action, is it A, ask the client if they would like to explore their fear of not finishing the book? B, remind the client they've achieved extremely challenging goals in the past and they can meet this big goal too? C, ask the client if there was a time when they were running a marathon and felt they couldn't finish. Invite the client to share how they handled that challenge in the race. D, support the client in identifying strategies to help them move forward in writing the remaining chapters of the book. So this one is Core Comp 7. And there's a metaphor alert in the scenario.
I'm going to jump into C.
Yeah, I'm leaning to C.
C. Now, one of the things that we've talked about is that, yes, it's the best answer because it addresses the metaphor. However, it does throw to the past, which we talk about. The ICF says coaching is in the present moving forward. The ICF defines therapy questions as exploring the emotional past. In this case, this is asking the client about a success state and how they can pull it forward into the current situation. And yeah, it could be worded better, but it's not exploring the emotional past. It's pulling success forward, and it's the only one that uses the client's language in using the metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
What's the worst one?
I think it's D because the others at least acknowledge. No, God.
Nope.
B? That seems very.
B. Oh, you've done big things before. Here, you just go. You're fine.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you can do it.
Oh,
You can do it.
Oh, you can do it. Get out of here.
Yeah,
Come on.
kind of like the going into cheerleader mode, not addressing anything. Like just you got this. You go. We're not being a
Okay.
partner in that. And even that word "remind," I wonder if that's a clue somewhere along the line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is number 8 then. So this one is around the client's success. A coach has worked with for 1 year with a client. The client has been identified by their supervisor as a potential leader in the organization based on their high quality work, good relations with peers, and innovative ideas for future projects. However, the client rarely speaks up in meetings with senior leaders, and when they do, they often downplay or diminish their ideas. The client's supervisor recommended coaching to improve the client's executive presence with the ultimate goal of developing as a leader in the organization. At the start of coaching, the client was often self-critical. However, the client has made tremendous progress in recent months. During their closing session, the coach notices the client has a confident, easy smile. When the coach shares their observation with the client responds by saying, "I feel different, empowered, ready to take on new challenges." The client adds, "And I was just nominated by the CEO to be part of a leadership development programming for emerging leaders in our company." What should the coach do? What is the best answer? Is it A, acknowledge the client's growth and confidence over the past year and invite the client how they plan to celebrate their selection for the leadership development program? Is it B, invite the client to identify the challenges they would like to take on next? Or is it C, ask the client what they may need to maintain their new confidence? Or is it D, suggest to the client they extend their coaching engagement to work toward a new goal of being promoted to a leadership role?
It's got to be A, right? But I still feel like that one's a little icky.
This is the first one that I feel like I identified the worst first.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jerome went with A.
Yeah.
I think it's A as well.
I think it's A.
All right. Yes, A is the one. So this is the client's growth. You've come a long way over our work together. How are you going to celebrate? Put those markers down of celebration.
Okay. Okay.
What,
I was going to ask around that. I was going to ask around that a bit. Inviting your client. Well, it is inviting them, so I guess it's not necessarily leading them to decide exactly how they're going to celebrate. So.
Yeah, it's more of a celebratory. I'm hesitant to use that word, but a recognition of you've come a long way. How are you gonna celebrate it? So that invitation, rather than telling them to go celebrate, because that is an important part of the hero's journey. When there's an accomplishment, that we put a marker down so that we remember that movement.
Yeah. Anchor it in.
Yeah.
All right. So Jen said she knew what the worst one was. What is it?
D.
D.
Yeah.
Yep. Turning it into a transaction of, hey, sign up for another package.
Yeah, come on. Come on. You don't want this to end.
You got a raise. Come on. You can afford me now. By the way, your rates went up.
And by the way, my rates went up. Yeah, I was just going to do that. You can do it.
So those are the 8 questions.
All right.
Dun, dun, dun.
Wow, we did that in record time.
We did do that in record time. That's awesome. So what are the thoughts around the table? Any questions from out in the viewership world?
I think probably Jen is the least familiar with these. What what do you think your takeaway from that is?
Can I share something that bothered me?
Yes.
There was one question, I want to say it was number 2. It was the question about the conflicting relationship of the potential client and
Question one.
it was which one?
Question one.
Okay. They're invested in a competing, right. So they're stating in the question that it is a competitor. It says you're invested in a competitor. And then one of the questions was maybe find out if it is a competitor. That threw me. And I was like, is this a trick? Are they tricking me here?
Jerome, can you go back to that one? Because I want to, now that I'm wondering about it, back to number 1.
Yeah. One more, I think.
So I'm trying to remember how that's worded. It's something like the coach recognizes
Yeah.
the name of the business as the coach is invested in a competitor business in a more established competitor business in the same community.
Right. So I read that as there's no question that it's a competitor. And then in the
Mhm.
answer choices, it's maybe a question that they're a competitor.
Oh, I hadn't noticed that before.
Maybe make a mental note to determine whether it is a competitor. Huh.
Ah,
Well,
yeah,
it
and that's
is.
also not one of the either of the answers, because the best was D and the worst was A.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mind kept going to that is like, that's going to be the worst because it's negating what was in the question. So
So another poorly
I,
written response.
I can see. Oh, I can
Yeah.
definitely see that as a way to decode it.
Mhm.
Um, the only thing I'll say as a possible workaround to it, and like the ICF has not given us any insight into why a question is better or worse, even after we set through an ICF training 2 weeks ago that was supposed to demystify this test. And why they mystified it to begin with, I'm not sure, but we were there to demystify it. The only thing I can come up with here is that at least B addresses digging into seeing if it's a competitor business or in some way downstream acknowledging it. But the better thing is to, in particularly since this one's around ethics, is to disclose upfront.
Right. So in this question, don't get thrown by that little thing. Stay focused on your scale of full transparency to opacity.
Yep. Because you're either operating ethically or you're not. And so core comps 1 and 2 are either observed or not observed. Core comps 3 through 8 have nuance to them around using the client's language, moving forward, setting the session contract. With numbers 1 and number 2, number 1 is about maintaining an ethical practice. Number 2 is about maintaining a coaching mindset. Both of those are either observed or not observed. You're either being ethical or you're not. You're either being a coach or you're being something else.
Yeah.
It also seems to me that anytime acknowledge and ask is involved, it's the right one.
But
It takes it toward.
I did notice that was in some of the options that we didn't choose. So you have to make sure to read that. But what you're saying is what Dan has come to the conclusion of: be aware of language and how the language is used.
Yeah, when they're both together, it tends to take it toward the best. There were a number of scenarios there where the answer included the word pause, but it didn't acknowledge, like pause and ask the client if they need a break. No, that would be assumption on top of it, even though that keyword pause was present.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
That's a
when
good
it comes,
call out.
yeah, another good call out. I think when it comes to choosing the worst, which I think, can agree is probably a little bit more difficult than selecting the best answer.
Yes,
taking
but we
yourself
think
out
they're
of the
all bad.
scenario. Yeah, I think what Dan mentioned is what the coldest response was. That really helped me
Yeah.
Mhm.
put myself in the scenario. I think can become easy to kind of take yourself out of the scenario because it's a test and you're just reading off answers. But if you put yourself in that scenario, I think it really helps in determining what that worst answer would be. What wouldn't you want your coach to say to you if you were in this spot?
Yeah, that could be a good way to break it down too. Think about sitting in the client's chair and how would you like to be responded to
Hmm.
with the ICF model as you have it. It might help.
So the other key is to become familiar with your competencies and ethics. Really go in the exam feeling comfortable that you understand what those are.
Yep.
Mhm.
And those videos on YouTube that they did a couple years ago of the 8 core comps, they're informative and they're engaging, that they could be watched 2 or 3 at a time. I
Yeah.
wouldn't binge watch them like a total Netflix series, but a couple a day to get through the better part of a week. They're really helpful in how the core comps build on top of each other.
Yeah.
And we'll be sure to go ahead and drop that in the chat for you guys so you can have a link to check that out. All right. Well, I know we usually kind of tease the idea of ending early, but we might be able to today. Unless you guys have anything else you want to touch on?
I think of the main focus was to talk into the exam in detail. And for me, I have text anxiety. I read things wrong. Just take a breath. You won't be able to have anything around you, whether you go to the exam site or you stay at home. Your desk has to be completely cleared of anything. They do allow accommodations, but those accommodations need to be a pre-request to anything, and they have to accompany a doctor's note. There's several different requests that they have. Oh, I have it right here. Is this it? No, this is a different document. They have you can ask for a longer test. You can ask for a test reader. So there's different accommodations that they'll allow, but you do have to have essentially a doctor's note with them saying why you need to have these accommodations. So they want proof as well.
And then I think the other thing, just to be aware of timings
Mhm.
with the current turnaround times on applications. The ICF is currently running around 20 weeks from the time you submit your application to the time that you get the email back to say that your recording has passed and you can go schedule your test. That's close to 5 months. So even if you were to, let's say today was the day that you had completed everything you needed and you put your application in, we're at what, March 28th, 29th right now. March, April, May, June, July, you'd be taking the test sometime this summer. So there's a lot of time to do the studying and look through it all before you would ever be taking the test.
That's good to know.
Yeah. Did any other questions arise, Jen or Jerome, while Dan was reading them off?
I just want to mention that this is supplemental to the video that we did last week, the live stream we did last week. So there's more information. If you guys would like to go ahead and check that out by going to last week's stream. We also have a few students who just recently passed their exam, and they get to kind of share their experience with you guys before and after.
All right. Does that mean we're going to end on time and a little bit early?
I think so. We
Okay.
can tell our best jokes here if you guys want.
Say that again.
I said we could tell our best jokes here if you guys want, but I don't know.
I'm on the spot. I have to do it when I'm making a mistake or something.
All right. Well, in that case, we'll just go ahead and see you guys next Tuesday, same time.
Wait, I have one.
Oh.
I have one.
Okay.
What's the passing score on the test? 460?
Yeah.
So what do you call the person who gets a 460 on the ICF credentialing exam?
An accredited coach.
That's it. Yes. It's a variation on the old one. What do you call the person who graduates last in medical school? Doctor.
Okay, that was good.
That was good. That was
All right.
good.
We are Certified Life Coach Institute. Thank you for tuning in. We certify students in a couple of classes, 3-day intensive, submersive, fun, entertaining, and it's very connecting. We've made a process of learning really absorbable in a short amount of time. So 3-day intensives, come join us if you haven't been with us. If you have joined us on 101, come join us with 102 if you have not. Thank you so much for tuning in. A like, share. Okay, we don't have to comment anymore because we're done, right?
Please still comment. Please still comment. We'll definitely answer
still
those
comment.
questions.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
post by.
And we miss the rest of our team members. Thank you for tuning in.
Alrighty. See you
Bye,
guys.
guys.
See ya. See ya.